So when I was asked to come and talk to you this morning about, why today's important, I thought, cripes, what am I going to talk about? So I thought I'll start by reading some of the industry press, reading some of the broader press, and with fresh eyes. I thought I might listen at some toilet doors and get to know what people are thinking about. And I'm afraid to say you'd be forgiven for thinking that we're living through some what are quite tumultuous and rather uncomfortable changes at the minute, whether it's about trust or data security, whether it's about challenges to the old business models, or even things like Brexit, or the struggle to get great talent. Things are changing fast, and there's an incredible world of uncertainty out there. Even Moore's Law's coming in for a bit of a banging. So, this is nothing new. Change has always happened, and this is a quote that absolutely nails that point. It wasn't said yesterday, it wasn't even said 50 years ago. This is a quote that was given 500 years before Christ was born. So why are we so obsessed with the pace of change? We all know there's a massive amount of pulling power, I think, in a disaster news agenda, and there's nothing like a crisis to get people talking in the aisles. But, if you're a young talented individual out of university or design school who wants to join into an industry and you're looking at it from the outside, does it feel like the pace of change is almost overpowering? And we know, for many people, there's more opportunities than ever in marketing and building brands. And this is some data from Marketing Week, which basically shows that marketing and the marketing disciplines, are struggling to compete at some level with all the other career opportunities out there. So in our view, it's time to challenge some of the naysayers and speak with greater unity about the power of the disciplines that build brands and their potential to change the world for the better. And the important reason why is because this agenda of uncertainty can actually fuel pessimism. In a way, uncertainty is viral. Confirmation bias soon gets to work, and it's very easy for people to kind of jump on the bandwagon. And certainly in the conversations I had in corridors and with individuals, there's actually genuine human anxiety about the pace of change and about the ability of organisations to keep up with that pace of change and succeed. But after all, we're generally quite pessimistic in an innate way. And this is some data from YouGov that show actually that most people believe that the world is getting worse. And there's a very human dimension to this culture of uncertainty. We've heard much about the rise of short-termism and the volatility of confidence in economic terms. But people and teams are given less time than ever to prove themselves. And this is some data that looking at the tenure of UK CEOs over the last few years and how that's reducing, and the average tenure of agency employees. We're not quite at the level of the UK football manager yet, but as you can see, we're giving people fewer chances and less time to prove what we can do. So what does this mean for our culture of creativity? There's been loads of psychological research around this topic, and actually what they find is that a culture of uncertainty or a context of uncertainty actually reduces people's appetite for creativity. So faced with an uncertain context, people are much more likely to choose practical solutions rather than creative solutions. And not only that, it actually reduces your ability to spot creative solutions when they're presented to you. The brain kicks in with all sorts of avoidance behaviours and essentially goes into a practical mindset. And I don't know about you, but that to me feels quite familiar, and I can see that happening, in all kinds of situations in life. So it's kind of sod's law, really. Just when we need our creativity the most in an uncertain context, it's going to become much more difficult to apply it. And I think that starts to explain why people so often say that they desire a creative solution, but then end up rejecting creative ideas. And this is a famous sculpture by Marcel Duchamp called The Fountain. And it's arguably one of the most important pieces of conceptual art that was done in the last century. It is actually an upturned urinal, if that's what you were thinking. And it was supposed to be being exhibited at the Society of Independent Artists. But unfortunately, and in 1917, it was quite tumultuous then as well, the directors of the society decided that it wasn't really worthwhile, and they actually put it in a back room. And what happened was some clever sod threw it away. Luckily, the artist managed to get a photo of it before it was done. So this is actually the only living representation of this piece of art, and it actually fundamentally changed art in the last century. So why are some organisations and some individuals able to, I suppose, thrive amidst uncertainty while so many struggle? So I had a look, because I'm a planner, for some research, and I found a guy called Dr. Seligman who'd spent decades researching learned helplessness and actually did a lot of work with the American Army, looking at what are the factors, what are the crucial factors at play in determining whether somebody's going to succeed in a situation or fail. And what he found was it was nothing to do with the ability of the person. It was absolutely nothing to do with how motivated they were. There was one crucial factor that was a predictor of success, and that was optimism. So we all know what optimism means. It's about, you know, the expectation and the belief that what you do is going to succeed or could succeed. And it struck us as a board how important that is to embrace optimism, when at the very root of what we do as brand builders, whether that's an agency side or client side, is inherently difficult. We're coming up with ideas, creativity is fraught with challenge. We're trying to change businesses. So risk and failure are innately part of what we do every day. So as individuals and organisations, we need that optimism more than ever. But there's even a business benefit, an economic value to optimism. A guy called Peter Schulman did some experiments on insurance salesmen. He'd probably run out of guinea pigs. But and what he found was that the more optimistic insurance salesmen didn't just sell 2% more or 5% more. They sold 35% more policies than their more pessimistic or negative colleagues. And also, they were half as likely to quit in the first year. So anybody who's responsible for employing and retaining and building talent, optimism has an economic value. But aside from selling, it's actually a vital springboard for creativity. And certainly the creative process in the brain, because optimism neutralizes the fear developed around an uncertain situation, and it actually counteracts some of those avoidance instincts that I mentioned before. So actually, optimism enables people to make that leap into the unknown, into that creative unknown. But you might be thinking, hang on, Lawns, I'm not an optimistic person. And there's definitely, I think, a cultural idea, which is you're either born an optimist or born a pessimist. But the good news there is that optimism is actually a muscle. It's a learned habit. It's something that we can develop, and there's been hundreds of studies that support this, that actually if you practice it, it becomes easier. So if we can build optimism at an individual level, then why not can we build it at an organizational level or a team level or an industry level or even a national level? So I thought, well, that's all very well. It sounds nice and fluffy, but what the hell am I supposed to do with it, and how can I build my optimism muscle? So I went back to Seligman, because he's obviously the guru in this world, and he had some broad principles or commitments that actually started to build a culture of optimism. The first one was about disputing the negativity, which is not just saying it's not a truth, but actively standing up when somebody is negative or putting forward a pessimistic message, to actively stand up. But it's not just that. It's actually feeling energized, I suppose, and feeling the positivity of the accomplishment of standing up to the negativity and the fatalism that is associated with it. It's also about increasing the awareness of previous successes, the times when we've been able to affect a desired outcome as brand builders. That challenges the notion of learned helplessness and shows that we can control our destiny. And this is, of course, at the root of EffWeek and what we're going to be talking about today and this evening. But there's also some other interesting things we can do. We can tap into the optimism of individuals. This is some data which basically shows how people view their future prospects, both at a national level and at an individual level. And what you can see is, when you ask somebody what their future prospects are likely to be in terms of the bigger picture, it's a lot more volatile, there's a lot more change, and there's a greater tendency to see the world in a negative way. But actually, the same individual can be weirdly stable and positive and optimistic about their own personal future prospects, as you can see. So it makes me wonder, as business leaders, whether we can tap more effectively into this private wellspring of optimism and grow an optimistic culture, almost one by one, individual by individual. The next principle is about creating a culture of autonomy, not just within teams, but within the partnerships that occur between agencies and clients. The young elephant is tethered as a calf, and it learns that it cannot pull, it's not strong enough to pull itself away from the tether. And what happens is, as it grows, it has the power and the strength, clearly, to pull itself away from its tether, but what it learns is that it is not able to do so. And this is a great example of learned helplessness. So we need to give our young people the more autonomy, more permission to explore and control their own destiny, which takes some risks. And it's also about not just replicating the learnings from before. It's so easy to come away from a session like today and reading the Effectiveness Awards and go, gosh, that worked for them, I'm just going to copy what went before me. We have to create a system and a culture that is comfortable with not just replicating what goes on, but actually reinventing, so that we're learning and adapting and moving forward with every step. And I'm hoping that each one of you takes away quite a few things from today's session and the things that are to come in the rest of the week, that you feel that you can experiment with tomorrow rather than just copying. And finally, it's just about, importantly, celebrating and publicising what makes our nation's creativity so peculiar, so interesting, and so powerful. I've found some data here which is about the number of book titles published per million inhabitants. And you can see the UK, and that's since 1500. We are an innately curious nation, and I think that's something that we should be genuinely proud of and shout much louder about as we move forward. So, okay, bringing this a little bit back closer to home and to today's purpose, what we share today is really important in this week, because it's the evidence that's going to be the root of our optimism. It's about celebrating the power of ideas, knowing that what we're doing is working and gaining the confidence from that, and certainly celebrating and making visible what we achieve, not just as competitors sometimes, but also as comrades. So I say sod uncertainty, and this is another quote from the same clever guy, Heraclitus, who nailed it at the beginning. After all, it's in changing our brands and in changing consumer behaviour and in changing ourselves and the world that we as marketers, I think, find purpose. So I believe our optimism and as brand builders and essentially visioneers of the future is not just infectious, it's not just precious, but for all of us, it's going to be absolutely critical because it genuinely has the potential to change the world for the better. Thank you.